Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning for what we believe will be an insightful panel discussion around BEMA Intel. But I have to say, it's a tough act to follow with Stephanie Stuckey's inspirational story, and congratulations, BEMA leadership and the BEMA board for the launch of Nexus. That looks really exciting. So, BEMA Intel is already 2 years old. Kind of hard to believe how fast 2 years goes by. And it is a tool, it's an important tool that you can use within your businesses. However, as with any tool, the magic is in knowing how to use it to extract the most out of it. So today we'll be asking Marjorie, Josh, and Jason a few questions around BEMA Intel, how they use this information themselves as leaders in their businesses, and also share with how can this tool be used to navigate the overall baking industry dynamics. But before we dive into the questions, I would like to have Marjorie give us a brief refresher of what BEMA Intel is and the purpose overall. Marjorie?
Sounds great. Thank you, Jennifer. It's a beautiful San Diego morning. Welcome, everybody. As Jennifer said, your Intel industry dashboard for all the data you need is now officially 2 years old. Now, when it was launched right at the beginning of the pandemic, we were able to baseline the industry impact of what would become a global phenomenon as the baking industry, including bakery manufacturers, their supply chain partners, were just trying to inch further and further into the pandemic. And we continue to work our way through the effects of the pandemic, just as Stephanie said. All of manufacturing is dealing with this. Well, Intel was up and running and providing quarterly updates in key trending areas to help you better understand, manage, and minimize risks in your business. It was just a silver lining during a very difficult time period that we had Intel up and running. Now, I have had conversations with BEMA members about Intel and have heard that some of the professionals are bookmarking the Intel page that's found on the BEMA website so that every quarter with a new release of trending data, they can just click through and see very quickly what the latest changes have been. So I think that's a great strategy. Now, parts of Intel, some elements are publicly available, but most of it is exclusive to BEMA members. And the Intel platform is basically, primarily the quarterly components of Intel come in three major buckets. And the two major buckets here in the orange, one is curated, a set of curated data points, and then the other is a set of created data points. So we have industry indicators from key economic general business and published in industry-specific sources. So that's the first one, that's the curated bucket. The other one is a created set of data, specifically for Intel, because we needed insights to help us understand what was happening on a quarterly basis for equipment industry manufacturers. So we had to create it. And we do that through quarterly pulse surveys with BEMA equipment industry manufacturers, and then report that back. So in these two orange buckets, we lift up on this data dashboard some of the top trends, and we post them every quarter on the Intel landing page. This is what the folks are bookmarking. So I would like, in the last 60 seconds I have with you, to spend a little bit of time with that quarterly summary. For those of you who aren't fully engaged yet with Intel, I hope you will be soon, because it's pretty amazing, as Tim had said. And I just want to show you the layout of the summary so that you can see how easy it is to interpret every quarter what's happening. So I know this is a lot, but this is the first page of the latest quarterly findings. It's sitting right on the Intel landing page on the BEMA website. And over at the left, you can see the gray columns. Those represent the data labels that describe what you're looking at for the associated trends on the right. And on this page, you see a lot of colors and you see a lot of arrows up and down. So what we're looking at are color-coded trends from Q1 compared to previous periods. And throughout the dashboard, color coding is used so you can really quickly determine industry impact. So of course, green means go, green is good. Yellow is neutral and red is negative industry impact. So without even looking at the figures themselves, you can kind of get a sense of the movement. And this is what's great about Intel, right? Is it's coming out every quarter so you can track it. If you see something in yellow that starts to tell you, I should pay attention to this and maybe dig deeper, you can go further into the data dashboard to get some of those findings. And we will talk also, spend some time with the panel, talking about this second page of the summary. You see, do you notice a lot of red on this page? Mostly it's because it's dealing with costs that everyone is coping with right now. Costs with ingredients, fuel, labor. And then the little green spot has to do with flour production trending for Q1. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to you, Jennifer, so that we can start to talk about, as a group, fitting these puzzle pieces together and how the variables that we've chosen interrelate to provide a clearer picture of what's happening within the industry and at the company level.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Okay, so Jason, just fair warning, I'm going to start with you and I'm going to end with you. Okay. You got to be the opener and the closer. So I think at least how I look at the BEMA dashboard, I tend to chunk it up, think of like puzzle pieces. The pieces don't really say or communicate anything to you till you put them together and you start to see the image or the picture to evolve. This is what BEMA Intel does as well. So if we could go ahead, we're going to start at the last part of the second page of the summary, Jason. So when you see diesel fuel up 60.7% over last year, labor is also at what may be an all-time low unemployment rate, but yet we're still seeing trending higher costs per unit of labor. What does it say to you? How does it speak to you in your business overall? And how could you use this to navigate some of those business cycles? And maybe we drill in a little bit deeper on the next one for the labor costs.
Sure, and if you take it back one slide, I mean, I think what we see is what we're all feeling, which is some headwinds and some tailwinds, creating a little bit of turbulence and uncertainty now, as much as any time in the last year or so. Obviously energy prices, we're not making news here that prices are increasing dramatically, costs are increasing dramatically. Energy is one component of that. Labor is another very important component. You see 6.6% here, but we'll look in a second at what that cumulative effect has been over the last 4 years, 20 to 25% increase in labor costs, energy increases in so many other areas. That's a challenge for our baker customers and their bottom line. Obviously, that potentially negatively impacts investment budgets and plans and business cases. So that's a headwind. But on the other side of the coin, you have the lowest unemployment rate in 40 plus years. That's a dynamic that's favorable to investment. It helps to, high labor costs and the challenge attracting and retaining people in the bakeries, it supports an investment case for automation. And so we're seeing all those things kind of in the mix, all those pieces fitting together. And as we'll look at later, I think the net effect is still a favorable and positive environment, but things are softening, and we're seeing that as well in the numbers with a recession potentially looming. And I'm interested to see how things are going to shake out in the next quarter.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, we're feeling this all across the board. One thing I want to point out on this slide in particular, notice that it comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So this is government data, and it's non-durable good labor costs. So it's the labor employed by often your customers, the end bakeries. It's not durable good labor costs, which you find more in manufacturing. Okay, so the next chunk of the dashboard that we're going to review is the baking ingredient costs and flour production. And Josh, I'm going to ask you these questions, and let's start with flour production. Why is it important to look at that, and what does that communicate overall for the baking industry?
Well, so our job at Milling and Baking News is to try to find the data, that's most important to our readers. And we have a range of constituents. So we've got the millers, we've got the bakers, we've got the equipment suppliers, and they all use the data a little bit different. Something like flour production, is used at a very granular level by the millers. They want to know whether or not they're getting the same number of pounds of flour from every bushel of wheat as their competitors, and all kinds of details. And the bakers use it a certain way. And what we kind of want to talk about is, so what about equipment manufacturers? But flour production is really, it is the kind of most basic way of taking the temperature of the industry. And it's a real way to help us kind of cut through the noise and figure out broadly what's going on. And, if you think about what was happening at the beginning of COVID, when, bread was flying off the shelves and bakers couldn't possibly keep up with demand on the one hand, but meanwhile, the restaurants were closing. And so how do you figure out how it's really all netting out? And flour production is a really good way to do that. And if you look at what's happened, there have been some kind of bumps up and down over the last couple of years, but basically it's been pretty flat. And why over time might this be important to this audience? I mean, there's a number of sources of business for all of you. There's the wear and tear at baking plants. There's sort of the depreciation and the fact that things kind of stop working over time. So that's a source of business. There are the efforts that companies make to so that their plants are more efficient, so they're more automated, so that they're more sustainable, and that can drive business. And then there's shifts from product to product. So even if flour demand overall is small, maybe they're moving from, cookies are more popular than cakes, or a cake company decides to go in the cookie business, and that means business for all of you. But if those are all pillars, a basic pillar that maybe sometimes we don't think about is the industry growing overall. And the truth is that our industry hasn't been. And we did some calculations recently, and we realized that if demand for flour products had simply kept up with population since the year 2000, we would need another 200 baking plants in the country to keep pace. So on a year-by-year basis, it might not seem to be a huge deal, but ultimately, for the long-term health of your businesses, you really want to see this number minimally creeping up and ideally growing.
Exactly. So then, Josh, as we go to the bakery ingredient indices, just for all of you to be aware who maybe have not gotten into the Intel dashboard yet and the full report, within the report that you get quarterly, there are 16 baking ingredient indices and reflective of the categories across baking overall. We've chosen just 2 for the panel this morning for Josh to compare and contrast and share with us why is it significant to look and drill down beyond the aggregate flour production for overall indication of the baking industry health, drill down now to the category level in the baking industry. And of course, those have some similar trends, but quite honestly, there's some differences as well per application.
Sure. I mean, bakeries tend to buy the same ingredients, right? They buy flour, they buy shortening, they buy sweetener, they buy other ingredients, but they do it in really wildly different proportions. And so as you think about your customers, the idea of the indices and we're in a really volatile time for ingredient markets, is to help you understand how a particular customer in their sector is being affected by markets and why. And of course, white pan bread is sort of the baseline product. But when Jennifer presented these two to me, and I saw them, these are based at the end of March, and I looked at them and I thought, oh, the data's screwed up. There's something the matter. And so I said, Marjorie, where are you getting your data? And she said, from us. And so, so I looked, and the numbers actually were right. What I hadn't really been thinking about is the degree to which things have been changing just in the last 3 months. If you were to look at the Devil's Food Cake bar right now, it's way higher than the white pan bread. And so that made me try to figure out why. And that's really what this data is, it's supposed to do for us. It's supposed to create a benchmark and say, why is this happening? What's going on? How is it affecting my customer? And there's some details that we really don't have time to get into for the Devil's Food Cake. And when we do our little breakout, we can talk about it a little bit more. But if you don't get to my breakout, I'll just tell you that the spoiler is it's the egg market. The egg market has just kind of made Devil's Food Cake ingredient costs explode in a way I hadn't appreciated until I kind of saw how it really can affect one of these indices.
Exactly. And I think you bring up a good point, Josh. The key to this is look at trends over time. And again, going back to the tool analogy, learning how to use it in order to extract the best out of it, trends over time is going to mentally over time, you will do what Marjorie explained, a red, yellow, green light in your head. Green light, go. Great, just keep monitoring it. Yellow, sit back and watch. Data by nature is historical. It's already happened. That's why we can get it. But you're trying to use this from a trend perspective as best as possible to have a hypothesis of which way the bakery market will go so that you can react in your business accordingly. So as you see the trends go up on the bar charts, let's say the purple one that is just 3 over to the left, when that data started to trend up, that was a yellow light. We didn't know how the peach or pink color and the orange color bar would end up over time. But now we're going into red light zone. And so the key here is when you see that, it's already happened, but it's an indication, start asking questions, talk to customers, talk to colleagues, just bounce around some hypothesis of what could be happening so that you can manage and use this to de-risk your business through these business cycles. Okay, Marjorie, we're looking at the multi-outlet bakery sales. And one thing I want to throw out and give kudos to BEMA about, because this is based on IRI data. IRI data is what we call scan data. So as all of us go to the grocery store and you scan across the scanner to check out and purchase your groceries, that's IRI data being taken from those codes on the products that is scanned. That data is what's called here. So we can get an indication of consumer buying behavior. And heads up, it's shifting within the baking industry right now. We're getting yellow light early indicators, but we can talk about that later in breakout session. However, for BEMA members, this is a huge perk for you to have IRI data. I can tell you from my budget perspective within Corbion, IRI data is not cheap, but it's very, very helpful for an indicator over time. So for that alone, the fact that BEMA is investing in its membership and giving you access to this is huge to have some IRI data. Sorry if I stole your thunder. But if we look at the commercial aisle baking and the in-store bakery, you're seeing green arrows up, but you have one red arrow down and another green arrow down. Can you explain the dynamics here?
Right. Well, and I will say these data include more than just supermarket. This is multi-outlet. Yes. So this is across multiple formats, right, of where people are buying their baked goods. And it's true. If we think about what Josh has said with flour production trends, we all know, of course, that the baked goods industry is not growing or wildly expanding. So I think this is part of that story of that pre-pandemic shifting around of consumer behavior, right? So we've got on the commercial aisle, bakers are doing a good job of using price increases to kind of balance out a loss in volume sales on the commercial aisle as consumers are starting to drift back to the ISB. Now that the pandemic isn't so scary and people are more willing to buy goods from the fresh perimeter, we're starting to see those numbers go up, and it's reflected in the first quarter. And this is the first quarter versus the same time last year. So this is not where Intel stops, though. What we do is we report out for some of the top drivers, the baked goods categories. We drill a little bit deeper for you so that you can take another look and get a little more granular to see where some of those shifts might be happening. And so if we focus our attention here on the orange circles, that's pointing out the trending for the commercial aisle. And so what we're seeing is some takeaway, some downturn in the consumer shopping across the bread category. And then for packaged cookies, where is that going? It is absolutely going to the ISB. And so again, we're starting to go back to fresh perimeter and get some of those fresh breads, some of those fresh cakes, cookies. And then I think Stephanie said it really well. During stressful times, we all need sweet goods to help us cope. And it doesn't really matter where we find those. So we're seeing both sales in dollar terms and volume terms go up for those sweet indulgent categories. So that's really what we're seeing. I would say, Jennifer, as we've talked about this, what will be interesting is where do shoppers continue to move around within the retail environment as inflationary pressures continue, as maybe we move into a recession. How is that going to be reflected in next quarters and the future Intel?
Right. And the key, again, to using this information, look at unit sales as a function of volume, because when you raise prices, it's great top line results, but that can hide what's actually going on in terms of market dynamics. So always look at the volume or unit sales as your baseline for an indicator of shifts in the market. And then overall, you can see over time where those shifts could be occurring. Now, what we believe is happening when we discuss this as a panel, there's a normalization that's going on in the baking industry coming out of COVID. So ISB took a beating in COVID. And so, yeah, it's all up from there. But right now you're noticing a dip in unit sales of the commercial baking aisle. We still have to see how the story unfolds. Is it because prices have gone up so much that consumers are cutting back on their spend? Is it because there's actually not a cutting back on spend, but there's a shift in categories that they purchase? So we do know, and we're starting to see trends over time of a consumer shift in terms of baked items they use as staples in their home. Younger generations buy different than older generations. So this is a stay tuned, let's see how this unfolds. But again, great tool to be looking at over time for your businesses to understand the overall market dynamics. Okay, Jason, I gave you fair warning. I'm ending with you. So the whole point of the dashboard is around the equipment industry outlook and also your bookings. So this is an indicator of this business cycle and what's going on. Think of it like a barometer. So far, you've heard from the panelists, puzzle pieces. So Jason, take the puzzle pieces from what you've heard, put it together and start to tell us about the picture that's forming in your mind as an equipment manufacturer. It could be this way or it could be this way. So what do you see?
Well, I mean, I think all the information and data highly relevant and organized in such a great way to access it and apply it. This is the place where I start when the new quarterly data is released. This is just a great tool to calibrate and benchmark. Is the experience in our business similar to what others are experiencing? Is the outlook that we feel is accurate for our business in the future consistent with what others are seeing? So, it's a really important component. And again, another quick reminder that it's only going to be valuable if we continue to have great participation and great input to this tool. So what do I see? It's hard to do better than 100% positive. I mean, so yes, we're seeing a softening in the outlook down to 86% in terms of industry outlook, still very, very strong. But that softening, and part of it for me is not just related to demand, it's also related to challenges that we're all having, because the reality is we can see a very strong demand environment, but if our supply chain and our businesses and all the challenges we're dealing with, are preventing us from fully maximizing or capitalizing on that opportunity, that dampens the outlook as well. So that's not, I don't think, completely attributable to a change in the demand outlook, because the bookings, again, are softening somewhat, but still very, very strong. I think you see there we're in the 70 percentile in terms of stable or growing in terms of bookings. It's down from the 90s. But as you said, looking back to when we kicked this off at the very beginning, right in the middle of COVID, now seeing how things are trending and changing over time, that's where the value is. It'd be very interesting to see what happens. This is all backward looking from Q1. What happens in Q2, we'll kind of see that trend. But again, still positive, still favorable outlook, but also a lot of headwinds that we're all challenged to deal with.
Exactly. So maybe that yellow light is starting to glow, and that's an indicator. Watch it, ask questions, and a hypothesis of, do you go left, do you go right? Because in this type of a market condition, you do have multiple hypotheses. It could be because we know for a fact the EBITDA or profits are being squeezed in the industry because of the input costs we've talked about, of labor, of fuel, of ingredients, all coming out of the pandemic. At the same time, how is that going to affect your customers in their CapEx investments of the future? But because of the labor shortage, it may be a positive thing. Predictions are the labor shortage is not going to loosen up for up to 5 years. So maybe you have customers, they're going to double down even if their EBITDA is impacted right now short term so that they can fully automate in the future. It could go left, it can go right, but that's the beauty of having this tool. Okay, so we have concluded this part of the panel, but behind you there are 3 stations, we call them 3 pods. We're going to be in the back, and we encourage, I think, Emily, you're going to give us some of the logistics. Great, you got your microphone. And we're going to cover more in depth some of what you've seen here. Some are some new posters that we have that are basically screenshots of what's inside the dashboard, the Intel dashboard. And we can have a discussion, bounce around some ideas of what is the data telling us, hypothesize how that can impact you in your business, and then how do you look at it over time? So Emily, if you want to give us the logistics.
Well, I think you did a pretty good job of telling people where they need to go.